Hi Year 11, so as promised I said that I would record the walking talking mock, the feedback that I gave you for the language paper 2 that we did in lessons. So as I have said already, try and get yourselves a set of highlighters for this exam so that you can highlight the sources that you're given in different colours for the questions that you have for section A. And obviously you're going to need a black pen, and it should be a black ballpoint pen that you're using then to write your answers. You could, when you are looking at question 1, have pencils so that you can make some notes about which of the statements that you're given are true or false. So that's the equipment that you're going to need and that you will need for the exam. So make sure that you have those. And as I said to you before, if there are any issues with purchasing those, then speak to either your English teacher or your form tutor, and we'll make sure that you've got that equipment ready for the exams. Okay, so I will be bouncing around from using the visualizer, the PowerPoint, and obviously the sources that I will read through. So hopefully I'll make that sort of as clean edits between each of those things so that it makes sense. We'll dive straight in then. As I said, this is the paper that you've gone through in our lessons together, and you have got copies of that I've given you that will be kept in your folder, your assessment folder in school. So what I would tend to do first is to actually read the question so that you know what you're looking for in the answer, in the resources. So for this section of the paper, you're advised to spend about 45 minutes, and 15 minutes then of that should be reading as well. So that obviously the whole paper is 1 hour 45, so 15 minutes reading, 45 minutes then reading and answering the questions on this section, and then section B you've got 45 minutes then to do the writing. So I will go through all of that as I am reading this, and as I've done in lessons, I will make sure that I've got the notes on this as well. When I write up my example responses, what I will do is actually use a Word document, just because I know my writing can sometimes maybe not be as clear when I'm sort of rushing under those exam conditions. So to make it a little bit easier and a little bit more legible, I will put that up on a Word document. So again, I'll just flick between what's needed. So this question then, question 1, is asking us to read again the first part of source A. So I'm going to highlight the keywords as I've been teaching you to do, and it's asking me to look at lines 1 to 21. So in fact, before I do anything else, the first thing I'm going to do is grab that. I'm going to get that section, and it was lines 1 to 21. So I am going to draw a box around that section so that I'm not going to be then taking any information from anywhere other than that area, and I'm using the same green highlighter that I'm using to highlight the question then as well. So I've actually put a box around that area. Okay, choose 4 statements below which are true. So again, you need to make sure you're only selecting those 4. There was someone who did pick more than that when we were looking at the responses. Now, if you do pick more than 4, they will only mark sort of the first 4 that you've selected. So that obviously might affect your mark if you've selected one that's wrong there and you've ended up maybe selecting 5 of them and you've selected one of the wrong ones, and it turns out to be before the correct one. So just make sure that you are selecting 4. It's worth 4 marks, so really I only want to be spending about 5 minutes on that. So I only want to be spending 5 minutes on this. It's a 4-mark question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through that section, and I'm going to look for this information. So what I'm looking at, I'm going to read through these first of all to see what I'm looking for. The writer recommends that to be happy, you should think about your own death. Corpse meditation is a term given to the practice of meditating in a grave. Corpse meditation is intended to make you more aware of how precious life is. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in 2004 for his study into misalignment. Misalignment is when you don't spend enough time thinking about how precious life is. Misalignment is when the time you spend doing things that give you satisfaction is less than the time you spend doing things that don't give you satisfaction. A 2014 study found that the average American spends much more time watching TV than engaging in spiritual or religious activities. And the last statement there is a 2014 study found that the average American spends much more time surfing the web than socializing and communicating. So I can kind of see that there's a pattern here. Two of them are talking about corpse meditation, and so one of them is giving me the definition, one of them is telling me what the purpose of that is. One of them is to do with this Nobel Prize for a study in 2004. Two of them are regarding misalignment, and two of them are regarding this 2014 survey. Obviously, the beginning one there is the writer recommending you to be happy as well. So I know that if any of these points come up, I can pause, come back to this, and I can use my pencil then to kind of make a mark next to it to see which one is correct. So that's what I'll go ahead and do now. I will put my projector on fully so that we can actually have a go at answering this question and seeing all of that as I make my notes. Okay, so now that I've read the question, I've highlighted the keywords in the question, I have read the statements, I know what I'm looking for, I'm going to go to that part of the source and I am going to highlight anything that's going to be relevant to this. Obviously, under exam conditions, I'd be doing this quite quickly. And then I will obviously cross-reference as I'm going as well, so I'll just show you what I mean by that. Okay, so the first extract is the 21st Century Non-Fiction article by Arthur C. Brooks, taken from the New York Times. So the title there was "To Be Happier, Start Thinking More About Your Death." So this is from 9th of January 2016. So as said, I will read now and cross-reference with that first question. So, want a better 2016? Try thinking more about your impending demise. Years ago on a visit to Thailand, I was surprised to learn that Buddhist monks often contemplate the photos of corpses in various stages of decay. Buddha himself recommended corpse meditation. This too, students were taught to say about their own bodies: such is its nature, such is its future, such its unavoidable fate. So it's already giving me a definition there of what corpse meditation is, which I know was one of the statements then at the beginning. So I'm going to grab my pencil. Now, it didn't mention anything about meditating in a grave. It just sort of makes this suggestion here that corpse meditation is meant to make you sort of reflect on life and thinking about sort of your impending demise. So actually that one, I know it's definitely not B, but it could potentially be C then that I'm looking at. So I'm not going to make any definite confirmations yet. I am just going to check all of the statements through before I then confirm and sort of fit with that. That one could potentially be one as well, A, because as it said there that to start thinking about life more and be happy, you need to start thinking more about your death. So that could potentially be a response as well, a correct answer. So back to the source. Paradoxically, this meditation on death is intended as a key to better living, so that definitely links with A. It makes disciples aware of the transitory nature of their own physical lives and stimulates a realignment between momentary desires and existential goals. In other words, it makes one ask, am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? That to me definitely suggests that A is going to be one of the correct true responses. In fact, most people suffer grave misalignment, so I remembered that in the question there are two statements there that link to misalignment. So the question was asking, is it true that misalignment is when you don't spend enough time thinking about how precious life is, or is it that misalignment is when the time you spend doing things that give you satisfaction is less than the time you spend doing things that don't give you satisfaction? So I'm going to be obviously looking for that now. In fact, most people suffer grave misalignment. In 2004 article in the journal Science, a team of scholars, including the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, surveyed a group of women who compare how much satisfaction they derive from their daily activities. Now, I know that he was mentioned as well, so I'll cross-reference that in a moment. Among voluntary activities, we might expect that choices would roughly align with satisfaction. not so. The women reported deriving more satisfaction from prayer, worship, and meditation than from watching television. Yet the average respondent spent more than 5 times as long watching TV as engaging in spiritual activities. So that definitely links to the idea that misalignment is when you spend time doing things, time doing the things that give you satisfaction. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be probably that one. So again, I'm going to put that there. Misalignment, it didn't mention anything about it being enough time spent thinking about how precious life is. Now, it's interesting because the Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in 2004. It doesn't mention him winning the Nobel Prize in that actual year. It does mention that the article was published in 2004, but it didn't say that he won the Nobel Prize for that article. So it suggests, actually, because it says including the Nobel Prize winner, it suggests that he could have potentially won that beforehand. So I'm going to say for now that that's going to be no. So at the minute I've got 3 that I think potentially could be correct. So as long as I figure out which one of these is the right one, it's looking very likely that those 3 are going to be correct and one of these is going to be one of the responses. So if anything, this study understates the misalignment problem. The American Time Use Survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that in 2014, the average American adult spent 4 times longer watching television than socializing and communicating, and 20 times longer on TV than on religious and spiritual activities. The survey did not ask about hours surfing the web, but we can imagine a similar disparity. So going back to it, it doesn't say anything about surfing the web, so actually that one is definitely not going to be correct. And it looks like this one's going to be my correct one. So in the exam, and I know that this paper is not laid out in the same way as the exam is, in the exam you would just have 4 boxes that you would have to shade in with the correct 4 responses. But for now I'm just going to highlight those ones that are correct. So obviously in the exam this is meant to be quite a quick response that you're giving, and you want to only spend about those 5 minutes on answering this question. So you want it to be quick enough so that you can go on to get your higher mark questions completed, but you don't want to rush through it so that you misread it and don't get those statements correct. As I said, I know that some people chose D, for example, as a correct response, but again, it's reading very carefully what's been written, because he did win a Nobel Prize, but actually in the text it doesn't say anything about him actually winning the Nobel Prize in 2004. So you have to be really, really careful with how they word those statements, that you've actually picked out the correct piece of information. So you want to do it quickly, but not so quickly that you're going to rush through it and get that incorrect. Okay, so checking that against the mark scheme then, was I correct? So I've got A, the writer recommends that to be happy you should think about your own death. Yes, I got that correct. C, corpse meditation is intended to make you more aware of how precious life is. Yes, I got that correct. And then F, misalignment is when the time you spend doing things that give you satisfaction is less than the time you spend doing things that don't give you satisfaction. And again, I got that correct. And then G, a 2014 survey found that the average American spends much more time watching TV than engaging in spiritual or religious activities. So again, as I said, just reinforcing there, the idea is that you do want to move on quickly, but you don't want to rush to move on quickly. You want to make sure that you've got the information correct. Okay, on to question 2 then. So question 2 tells you to refer to source A and B. And again, I'm going to highlight the keywords. I'm going to grab a different coloured highlighter so that I can highlight in different colour in the sources. So you need to refer to source A and source B. So I need to read both now. Use details from both sources. So I need to make sure I've got quotes from both of them. So I'm going to make a note of that. If it's talking about the details, I need quotes. Write a summary, now I'll focus on that in a moment, of the differences between the 2 writers' experiences. So there's my focus, and it has to be things that are different, not similar. Now, A summary, this is almost a little bit misleading, because to summarize something is to pick out sort of most concise elements of a text. So you're trying to pick out and provide a sort of simple sort of the gist of what's being said. But in this exam, for this question, you actually need to do a little bit more than that. You can't just summarize the details. You actually have to make some inferences as well. So one of the strategies that we've had a look at using, and I'm going to use this as well, is that in your response you want to give a statement or a point. So you want to give a statement or a point. You want to pick out some evidence. You then need to make an inference about it, and then you're going to link it in terms of differences for this question to the other source. So you'd make a link, and then you do the same thing again. So statement, inference, and you talk about the second source. Additionally, this is an 8-mark question, so realistically we want to be spending about 10 minutes on this question in terms of answering it. So 10 minutes to actually write up our response. So what I'm going to do now is spend this next sort of few minutes reading through both of the sources, and I want to look at the writer's experiences. So what was it that they've gone through? What is it that they have experienced that's ended up sort of leading to these articles that have been produced? Okay, so reading through then, and I want to know anything about their experience. Okay, so I've already started to read through this one, but I will go again from the beginning there. So Want to Better 2016, try thinking more about your impending demise. Years ago on a visit to Thailand. So his experience then, where he started thinking about this subject and this topic, is actually on a visit to Thailand. I was surprised to learn, so he learnt this while he was on holiday, that Buddhist monks often contemplate the photos of corpses in various stages of decay. The Buddha himself recommended corpse meditation. This body too, students were taught to say about their own bodies, such is its nature, such is its future, such its unavoidable fate. Paradoxically, this meditation on death is intended as a key to better living. It makes disciples aware of the transitory nature of their own physical lives and stimulates a realignment between momentary desires and existential goals. In other words, it makes one ask, am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? In fact, most people suffer grave misalignment. In a 2004 article in the journal Science, a team of scholars, including the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, surveyed a group of women to compare how much satisfaction they derived from their daily activities. Among voluntary activities, we might expect that choices would roughly align with satisfaction. Not so. The women reported deriving more satisfaction from prayer, worship, and meditation than from watching television. Yet the average respondent spent more than 5 times as long watching TV as engaging in spiritual activities. So again, this is suggesting to me that his experience is based on research. So he's actually found research on this, and it's not something that he's sort of experienced himself. If anything, this study understates the misalignment problem. The American Time Use Survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that in 2014 the average American adult spent 4 times longer watching television than socializing and communicating, and 20 times longer on TV than on religious and spiritual activities. The survey did not ask about hours surfing the web, but we can imagine a similar disparity. This misalignment leads to ennui and regret. I'm reminded of a friend who was hopelessly addicted to British crossword puzzles. So again, he's sort of using his experience of what somebody else is telling him. The ones with clues that seem inscrutable to Americans, such as the portly gentleman ate his cat backwards. A harmless pastime, right? My friend didn't think so. So again, this is coming from someone else that he's talked to. It's not something that he's been through himself. He was so racked with guilt after wasting hours that he insulted a psychotherapist about how to quit. The advice: schedule a reasonable amount of time for crosswords and stop feeling guilty. While few people share my friend's interest, many share his anxiety. Millions have resolved to waste less time in 2016 and have already failed. I imagine some readers of this article are filled with self-loathing because they just wasted 10 minutes on a listicle titled Celebrities with Terrible Skin. Some might say that this reveals a true preference for TV and clickbait over loved ones and God, but I believe it is an error in decision making. So again, it's just sort of based on personal beliefs here, not really on experience. Our days tend to be an exercise in distraction. We think about the past and future more than the present. We are mentally in one place and physically in another. Without consciousness, we mindlessly blow the present moment on low-value activities. The secret is not simply a resolution to stop wasting time, however. It is to find a systematic way to raise the scarcity of our time to our consciousness. Even if contemplating corpse is a bit too much, you can still practice some of the Buddha's wisdom, resolving to live as if 2016 were your last. Then remorselessly root out activities, small and large, that don't pass the last year test. There are many creative ways to practice this test. For example, if you plan a summer vacation, consider what would you do for a week or two if this were your last opportunity. With whom would you reconnect and spend some time? Would you settle your soul on a silent retreat, or instead spend the time drunk in Cancun, Mexico? If this year were your last, would you spend the next hour mindlessly checking your social media, or would you read something that uplifts you instead? Would you compose a snarky comment on this article, or use the time to call a friend to see how she is doing? Hey, I'm not judging here. Some think that the last year test is impractical, as an acquaintance of mine joked. So again, this is kind of information that's second-hand. He's gaining this experience through somebody else. If I had 1 year to live, I'd run up my credit cards. In truth, you probably wouldn't. And again, we've got research here in a new paper in the Science Journal PLOS 1. 2 psychologists looked at the present value of money when people contemplated death. One might assume that when reminded of death, people would greatly value current spending over future spending. But that's not how it turned out. Considering death actually made respondents less likely to want to blow money now than other scenarios did. Will cultivating awareness of the scarcity of your time make you grim and serious? Not at all. In fact, there is some evidence, so again he's talking here from research, that contemplating death makes you funnier. 2 scholars in 2013 published an academic paper. Again, his experience is coming second-hand through research. Detailing research in which they subliminally primed people to think about either death or pain, and then asked them to caption cartoons. Outside raters found the death-primed participant captions to be funnier. There's still time to rethink your resolutions, forget losing weight and saving money. Those are New Year's resolutions for amateurs. This year, improve your alignment and maybe get funnier in the process. Be fully alive now by meditating on your demise. Happy 2016. So that's exactly how I'd approach it. I would obviously highlight those things as I go through. So what I want to be able to do now is I've got my source B. This is my 19th century extract. So it's an extract from a letter this time sent by Fyodor Dostoevsky to his brother on the 22nd of December 1849. So remember, I'm looking this time for differences. I want to see how is this experience different to that of the experience in source A of the writer, who's very much talking about research, talking about a trip that he's gone on, and those are his sort of experiences then that have brought him to discuss the topic he's discussing. Okay, so reading through it then, again, as I said, I want to highlight experiences that are very different from source A. So, brother, my precious friend, all is settled. I am sentenced to 4 years hard labour in the fortress, I believe of Orenburg, and after that to serve as a private. Today, the 22nd of December, we were taken to the Semenov drill ground. There the sentence of death was read to all of us. Okay, so very different experience there. He has literally been read a death sentence. So his is very much a first-hand experience where he himself thought he was about to die. We were told to kiss the cross Our swords were broken up over our heads, and our last toilet was made. White shirts. Then 3 were tied to a pillar for execution. I was the 6th. So again, he's had a very close call here with death. And again, he's had to sort of experience and anticipate his own death, watching others go to theirs. 3 at the time were called out. Consequently, I was in the second batch, and no more than a minute was left me to live. So again, very personal experience. No more than a minute was left me to live. I remembered you, brother, and all yours. During the last minute, you alone, were in my mind. Only then I realised how I love you, dear brother mine. I also managed to embrace, again I know I'm going to butcher these, Pleshev and Durov, who stood close to me, and to say goodbye to them. Finally the retreat was sounded, and those tied to the pillar were led back, and it was announced that His Imperial Majesty granted us our lives. So, I'm going to highlight that because it just highlights again that he was very close to dying, and he was saved at the very last minute. Then the present sentences. Palm alone has been pardoned and returns with his old rank to the army. I was just told, dear brother, that today or tomorrow we are to be sent off. I asked to see you, but I was told this was impossible. I may only write you this letter. Make haste and give me a reply as soon as you can. I am afraid that you may somehow have got to know of my death sentence. From the windows of the prison van, when we were taken to the Semenov drill ground, I saw a multitude of people. Perhaps the news reached you, and you suffered for me. Now you will be easier on my account. Brother, I have not become downhearted or low-spirited. So, you could say that that is part of his experience, that he did not allow himself in that experience to become saddened or sort of, as he says there, low-spirited. Life is everywhere. Life in ourselves, not in what is outside us. There will be people near me, and to be a man among people and remain a man forever, not to be downhearted, nor to fall in whatever misfortunes may befall me. This is life. This is the task of life. I have realised this. So he's obviously had a realisation there about life and the importance of life, and living is the most important thing to him, and external things are of less concern after this very sort of visceral experience of facing his death. This idea has entered into my flesh and into my blood. Yes, it's true. The head which was creating, living with the highest, the head which was creating, living with the highest life of art, which had realised and grown, used to the highest needs of the spirit. That head has already been cut off from my shoulders. So he feels like he has, a part of him has died, and that part of him that felt that he was not maybe thinking right and in the right frame of mind about life and sort of being appreciative of life. There remains the memory and the images created but not yet incarnated by me. They will lacerate me, it is true, but there remains in me my heart and the same flesh and blood which can also love and suffer and desire and remember. And this, after all, is life. Envoy et le soleil. And again, where you've got these asterisks, they will explain that at the bottom of the exam paper for you. Now goodbye, brother, don't grieve for me. You see that glossary then at the bottom here. Write to me more often, write more details, more facts. In every letter, write about all kinds of family details, of trifles, don't forget. This will give me hope and life. If you knew how your letters revived me here in the fortress. These last 2 months and a half, when it was forbidden to write or receive a letter, have been very hard on me. I was ill. The fact you did not send me money now and then worried me on your account. It meant you yourself were in great need. Kiss the children once again. Their lovely faces do not leave my mind. Ah, that they may be happy. Be happy yourself too, brother. Be happy. But do not grieve. For the love of God, do not grieve for me. Do believe that I am no downhearted. Do remember that hope has not deserted me. In 4 years there will be a mitigation of my fate. I shall be a private soldier, no longer a prisoner, and remember that some time I shall embrace you. I was today in the grips of grip of death for 3/4 of an hour. I have lived it through with that idea. I was at the last instant, and now I live again. So again, it comes back to his experience that for those 45 minutes, he believed that he was going to die. So very much a personal experience for him, where he's had to undergo this sort of mental torture of knowing that his death was imminent. So what I will do now, I'm going to use these two sources and select at least two things that I want to compare for that question. So if I bring that question back, so remember what I am looking at is I want to write a summary of the differences between the two writers' experiences. Now, what I would suggest for answering this question is be able to write at least 4 paragraphs comparing two differences. So the way I'm going to do that, I am going to give an example of one of those differences, but obviously in the exam I would write about 2 differences in 4 paragraphs. So I'm going to go back to the extracts and I'm going to pick out the 2 things that I would compare, those 2 differences. Well, the first thing here that I would say is that in this one, it's all about a visit to Thailand. So he's taken a trip, and that's obviously sparked his interest in this idea of thinking about death, and that's his experience. While he was there, he learnt about this Buddhist phenomenon of corpse meditation. So that is going to be one of the things I'm going to talk about as a comparison. Now, the other thing I would go on to compare as well would be that in this one it's very much based on second-hand then experience through other people, where he mentions all these sort of references to other people and their sources and journal articles. So that would be the other point that I would compare to Dostoevsky's letter to his brother. Now, I'm going to go with the trip for the first comparison that I'm going to make, and in comparison to that I'm going to say that it was a trip and that he was on holiday and that sparked his interest. In this one, it is a direct experience of being sentenced to death that has sort of prompted him to write about this subject. So that's his experience. I might just put question 2 there because I know that is what I'm going to write about for question 2. And I'm going to compare that to the holiday. So I'll bring up a Word document and I'm going to go through typing that up as I would obviously write it in the exam, and I will sort of explain my thought process as I write that out using that structure that I did explain, the statement, evidence and inference, and then I want to link it and talk about source B. So I'll bring up the Word document and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so we will start by making a general statement then about the two, because I know lots of you find it difficult to start the questions. So I'm literally just going to reword the question, and that's how I would start, especially if you do find it difficult to begin answering questions. So I'm literally just going to say that the experiences of both writers is very different. So statement, just making that comparison between two of them, just rewording the question. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to start with source A. So in source A, and you don't have to start with source A, it's just for me it's more logical to move from source A to then source B. But the response I'm giving you is a very formulaic response. You don't have to follow this so strictly and rigidly, but obviously if you've never answered this question before, it's a good place to start. So in source A, the writer states that on a visit to Thailand, he, I'm going to put learned there, and I'm going to spell it correctly, learned, again I'm going to cut this down so that Buddhist monks often contemplate the photo of corpses. Going to put my ellipses in there to show that I've cut these quotes out from other sections, and I need to add some in there because I didn't put those in. So I'm embedding my quotes and I'm putting my ellipses to show that I have cut these down into just the parts that I want. So I've got my point, I have got my evidence, now I want to make an inference. So I'm going to start this as a new sentence. Again, I know that I'm making this quite formulaic. This suggests that his experience of facing death and thinking about death has been taught to him through a travelling experience. It is not a personal confrontation with death, but something he becomes aware of other people doing on a trip. So I'm making the inferences there, it's telling me what that quote is suggesting to me, almost kind of rewording certain parts of the quote as well as I'm saying that, because I don't want to use the same wording that's in the actual quote itself. So this suggests that his experience of facing death, thinking about death, has been taught to him through a travelling experience. So I've said travelling rather than a visit. It's not a personal confrontation with death, but something he becomes aware of other people doing. So again, I don't want to sort of repeat the idea that Buddhist monks are looking at this, so I've said that other people are doing on a trip. So again, I've used different wording than to visits because I want to make sure that it's an inference and not just me repeating what's already in the quote. So now I want to make that comparison to source B. So I'm going to say, however, in source B, the writer states there the sentence of death was read to all of us. So again, I've got a statement there, I've got my evidence, and now I am going to put again my suggestion. So I'm going to use highlighting here instead of suggests, because I've already said suggests. The experience that he undergoes is a personal one, as he was due to be executed. This experience seems far more visceral than the experience of the writer in source A, as the writer of source B faces death directly and believed that he was about to die. which is vastly different to source A. So what I will do there, I'll just sort of show you in terms of highlighting the key parts of that. So there I'm tying into the question and making a statement. I've then got my quotation that I have embedded, my second one there that I've embedded, and then my inferences. So suggest what he is going through, that it's not personal confrontation, but something he becomes aware of other people doing on a trip. So again, I've brought it back to the question of showing a difference then, and in source B, I have used a quotation to support that. Oh, don't want to do that. Other way. So my quotation, and again then going to making an inference. So I am almost making an inference here as I'm comparing as well, but ultimately I am making that comparison between the two as well, and that's in that last bit. So my advice for this is when you are using quotations, make sure that you are making an inference after your quotations to show the examiner that you have an understanding and insight into that quotation, and you understand what is going on and happening in that quote, so you can look at the deeper meaning behind it. You want to be able to compare. You can see there that I've made the comparison between the two, and actually I've put that in the wrong colour. I actually want this bit in green, because that's where I've linked back to the question, but I have made some inferences back there as well to what I've just said between the two sources as well. So hopefully that helps in terms of answering that question. Obviously in the exam I would go on to make another comparison at least between the two of them. This should take me just under sort of 10 minutes to write the response with both of those comparisons. So you want to be able to get into the habit of writing this, and I would suggest that you have a go at answering these questions as often as you can. The workbook that we have given you will have some examples in there, and it will ask you some exam questions. So I would suggest that you do that as well for practice. So the more often you're doing this, the quicker it will be in the exam as well, because it will be second nature. If you've answered these questions repeatedly, you'll know what structure to use. You'll have sort of repeated yourself so often with writing, for example. However, on the other hand, suggests, highlights, implies, you'll sort of be used to the wording of it then as well. So we'll go on to question 3 next. So just before we dive into looking at question 3, okay, this is the mark scheme then that is used by the examiner to mark that question. Now you want to be able to obviously aim for level 4 to provide perceptive and detailed responses. So you can see there the descriptor for level 4. So show a detailed understanding of differences between the two writers' experiences, and this is where your inferences will really help you to hit that mark. Offer perceptive interpretation of both texts, so you can see and offer that sort of deeper meaning, deeper understanding of the text. Synthesis evidence between texts, so in other words, you are picking out that key information from both the texts and you are using quotes from each of them. That's going to tie into the next point. Select a range of judicious quotations from both texts. So remember, we've talked about that word judicious, so it's well judged. You're not just picking any old quote out of there. And actually, when you are using a quote, you are using the part of the quote that you need to answer the question, not just writing down a whole huge chunky quote that you don't necessarily need all of. And obviously then that's where you want to aim to be, is for those 7 or 8 marks. 5 to 6 marks, you want to be able to show that clear understanding of differences between the two writers' experiences. You want to begin to interpret the both texts, so that's where we want to begin to get the inferences. Demonstrate clear connections between the texts. So again, you've got sort of a very clear difference between them, and then you've selected relevant quotations to back that up and to support what you're saying. I would say that for my class, I want you to aim for that level 3, level 4. So thinking about the responses that you did in the assessment that we did in class, have a little think about where you hit the mark scheme and what you need to think about doing in order to get up that mark scheme, that marking ladder, to gain more marks. Potential things you could have talked about then. Each examiner will have a list of potential responses that could have been focused on. Not to say that if you didn't talk about one of these things but talked about something else that was relevant, that wouldn't be marked. It would be, as long as it is valid and it makes sense in the context of the text that you've been given. So things you could have looked at were the idea that with Brooks in source A, he gained his ideas after a trip to Thailand, which is something I decided to focus on, in which he learned about the practices of Buddhist monks. Dostoevsky had a near-death experience then in comparison. The other thing that I said I was going to look at, most of Brooks' experiences comes from his own research into attitudes towards death, so he had a little look at the research, questioning others, looking at surveys. In comparison, Dostoevsky faced death directly, but he was saved at the very last minute, and this is what gave him that lease of life. So again, for Brooks it comes from research, whereas with Dostoevsky it comes from being pardoned at the last moment. Okay, on to the language question then for number 3. So you now need to refer to source B only. So again, I'm going to highlight those keywords. Just helps me focus on the question then when I'm answering it. How does Dostoevsky use language to show how much he loves his brother? So it's a how question. I'll come to that in a moment. I have gone through that with you before. Use language to show how much he loves his brother. So it's a language question. I know I need to discuss language here to show how much he loves his brother. So there's the focus of my question. That's what I know I need to be looking at. Additionally, this is a 12-mark question. So ideally, I want to be spending about 10 to 15 minutes on this. And for this question, I am going to be aiming to write about 3 to 4 paragraphs. Now, there are obviously lots of different structures that we can use with answering that question. We have got different formulas that can be used for answering that question. And again, these can really help when we are first answering questions like this. Now, I'm not saying again that you have to stick to this structure, but it does help you initially when you're trying to answer a question like this. Now, we've learned the Peter paragraph structure. It's one that I like because it ensures that you have all the elements in that you need to include for this question when you're answering it. So one of the other points that I'm going to make as well, when we are asked a how question, we want to be looking at methods, because that is how the writer has created certain effects, and we know that language, we want to be making reference to some of our subject terminology, and that's the same thing. Now, the exam board say that you do not require techniques, subject terminology or methods in your response to gain high marks, but something that my teacher always used to tell me when I was doing my A-level, if you know a technique, you may as well show that off to the examiner. It means that you then are also writing in a more academic way and to a more academic standard, and it just gets you into that habit. And particularly in my class, that's what I would like you to do. When you are writing, make sure that you are using subject terminology. Like I said, it just prepares you for the future as well. If any of you do consider taking literature for A-level, it's just getting into good habits already at GCSE. So if you do know something, show it off to the examiner that you do know it. So I will again put up the visualizer so it's all focused on that, and I'm going to be pulling source B in front of me so I can highlight anything to do with how this writer loves his brother. Okay, so source B then, and as I said, I want to keep that question in front of me as well. I'm looking at all the ways in which the writer expresses love for his brother. So even from the beginning here, I can already see some points that I'm going to be highlighting. So brother, my precious friend. So again, as I'm highlighting this under exam conditions, I'm already going to be thinking to myself, well, my reasoning why I'm highlighting certain points. Precious there, that adjective suggesting that he's something that's valuable to him, and already initiating that strong affection for his brother as well. All is settled. I am sentenced to 4 years hard labour in the fortress, I believe, of Orenburg, and after that to serve as a private. Today, the 22nd of December, we were taken to the Semenov drill ground. There, the sentence of death was read to all of us. We were told to kiss the cross. Our swords were broken over our head, and our last toilet was made. So I'm going to very much, in the exam, obviously, I wouldn't necessarily be reading in this much detail. I might well be skimming through because I want to be able to remember, pick out at least 4 points that I'm going to make. So I might not read in this much detail when I'm in the exam. Then 3 were tied to the pillar for execution. That was the 6. 3 at a time were called out here. I mean, he's talking very much about his experience there. So really, as I said, I want to skim past these kind of points. This is where I am going to be sort of more invested in what I'm reading, and I want to be looking at this in a bit more detail. So, I remembered you, brother, and all yours. During the last minute, you alone were in my mind. Only then I realised how I love you, dear brother mine. I also mentioned Brace Preshev and Durov, who stood close to me and said goodbye to them. Finally, the retreat was sounded, and those tied to the pillar were led back. Again, I'm not so interested in this bit. It's not telling me anything about his relationship with his brother. And it was announced that His Imperial Majesty granted us our lives. Then the present sentences. Parmelone, who had been pardoned, and returns with his old rank to the army. So again, I'm not so interested in that. I was just told, dear brother, that today or tomorrow we are to be sent off. I asked to see you, so that might be important because obviously he wanted to see his brother, showing again the sort of significance and importance of their relationship. But I was told that this was impossible. I may only write you this letter. Make haste and give me reply as soon as you can. So that's going to be important there as well. So one of the last things he wants to do is to write to his brother. And he gives him this sort of imperative, suggesting that he wants this reply desperately. Again, sort of showing how important his brother's word is to him. So again, here I'm going to be interested. I am afraid that you may somehow have got to know of my death sentence. So that emotive language, afraid, showing that there's fear there, and then going on to explain that you may have known my death sentence. So that fear really is sort of highlighting, enforcing there that he doesn't want his brother to suffer as a result of his death sentence. So again, showing how important and the significance of his brother, how much he loves him, that he doesn't want to put him through pain. So that is something I could talk about, and it's separate from the other points that I've seen there as well. So already I've got 3 really clear bits of evidence that I could use. So I could talk about the precious friend. I could talk about this one, which I didn't sort of talk about just now, but when I was reading it, what it made me think was, in particular, this personal pronoun you alone. It's also repeated. So there's repetition of that. So, this idea that he's in earnest to his brother. He's desperately sort of directing what he's saying to his brother, suggesting again there that you hit the importance of his brother. And during the last minute, you alone. So adjective as well, describing him being on his own, the last thing on his mind, that there was nothing else more important, and that kind of very much emphasises the importance and significance of his brother's presence in his life. Only then I realised how I love you, dear brother. So again, this emotive language suggesting as well that strong bond, and the adjective dear, and the possessive pronoun mine. Again, there's so much I could take out of this quote. So this quote would definitely be one of the quotes that I would talk about in my response, because there's so much I can take out of that quote. And it is quite a long quote. I might not sort of take all of it, but there is so much from that I could discuss. So that would definitely be one that I want to use, because I want to get as many marks as possible, and that quote will help me get that, because there are so many points I could make about it, so many bits of terminology that I know, that I can see, that actually I can address in my response. So already I've got 3 quotes. So at this point I could very well just get on with writing my response, but I'm going to just sort of again show you this idea of tracking through and finding quotations that are going to be relevant. From the windows of the prison van, when we were taken to the Semenov drill ground, I saw a multitude of people. Perhaps the news reached you, and you suffered for me. So again, that kind of links back with something I've already highlighted. So this is what I mean by being judicious with your quotations. There is no point in me talking about this quote in one paragraph and then repeating myself with this one, because I've already made that point that he is worried about his brother, that he doesn't want his brother to feel any pain on his account. So it would be silly to talk about that in those two quotes in two different paragraphs. I could, in one paragraph, talk about both quotes and talk about how, he repeats this when he says, you suffered for me, so suggesting then as well that he doesn't want him to be in pain by that sort of verb there, the use of suffered again, quite emotive. So I could, again, like I said, put that into one thing. So this is more now talking about his changing perspective on life. So again, it's not going to be as relevant to this question. From the windows of the van, when I take the cement of dry, I saw multiple people, perhaps news reached you and you suffered. Now you will be easier on my account. Brother, I have not become downhearted or low-spirited. Life is everywhere. Life is ourselves, not in what is outside us. There will be people near me, and to be a man among people and remain a man forever, not to be downhearted, nor to fall in whatever misfortunes may befall me. This is life. This is the task of life. I have realized this. This idea has entered into my flesh and into my blood. Yes, it's true. The head which was creating, living with the highest life of art, which had realized and grown used to the highest needs of the spirit, that head has already been cut off from my shoulders. There remains the memory and the images created, but not yet incarnated by me. They will not lacerate me, it is true, but there remains in me my heart and the same flesh and blood, which can also love and suffer and desire and remember. And this, after all, is life. Envers le soleil. Now, goodbye, brother. Don't grieve for me. So I might want to pick out that sort of simple sentence there, the imperative, again suggesting and emphasising that he doesn't want his brother to be upset on his behalf through that emotive language there with grieve as well, which is a verb as well. So I want to try and, like I said, cram as much and show off as much of that to the examiner as I possibly can. Going on to this next bit then, write to me more often, write more details, more facts. So again, quite commanding, showing that he wants to communicate and establish that communication with his brother. So again, showing how much he loves his brother, that he cares about him, he wants to hear from him. I could use part of this as well, so I've got lots of options here. And like I said, I'm just kind of expressing to you my inner thoughts as why I'm highlighting these things. And obviously I only want to select 3 to 4 of these depending on how much time I need for answering these questions. This will give me hope and life. So again, that's quite important because it's putting a lot of importance on the letters from his brother. Again, reinforcing the significance of that relationship. If you knew how your letters revived me, here in this fortress. So again, that verb revived, suggesting that it brings him back to life, that he gives him life. So reinforcing how important the communication with his brother is. These last 2 months and a half, when it was forbidden to write or receive a letter, have been very hard on me. I was ill. The fact that you did not send me money now and then worried me on your account. It meant you yourself were in great need. Kiss the children once again. Their lovely faces do not leave my mind. I mean, again, I could sort of talk about the importance here of worried me on your account. Because again, he sort of worries about his brother's situation. All that they may be happy yourself too, brother, be happy. So again, I'd be very mindful of this quote because I know some of you use this quotation in your response, but very much just repeated that idea of happiness. But obviously he wants his brother to be positive, again sort of emphasising that it's he does not want his brother to suffer, he wants his brother to not feel pain on his account. He wants his brother to be content. So he's explaining it in a way where you're not repeating the quote and you're making an inference from it rather than just repeating. But do not grieve for the love of God, do not grieve for me. So again, there's repetition of this and emphasising the idea that he doesn't want his brother to suffer. So again, a lot of these points all link into each other. So it would be silly to write 3 paragraphs all about this idea of his brother not wanting his brother to suffer. You want to pick out different points so that it's sort of reinforcing different parts of how he sort of shows his and expresses his love. Do believe that I am no downhearted. Do remember that hope has not deserted me. So again, he wants his brother to think positively. He doesn't want his brother to think badly. And he's kind of putting on a brave face for his brother there. In 4 years, there will be a mitigation of my fate. I shall be a private soldier. no longer a prisoner, and remember that sometime I shall embrace you. So that again might be quite significant. Embrace is to hug, and again showing that sort of closeness, that that physical expression of his love for his brother. And embrace is quite kind of caring suggestion of a hug. So that again might show the relationship that they have. I was today in the grip of death for 3 hours, 3/4 of an hour. I have lived it through with this, with that idea. I was at the last now, and I live again. So I've got lots of choices there. So this is what I now need to be able to do. In the exam, I would only want to talk about 3 or 4 of these. I do not want to write about all of them. That's going to take ages. That would be a proper essay. So I'm going to pick, this is again that word judicious, I'm going to pick the best ones. I am obviously going to pick this one, because that one just makes no sense not to use it. There's so much that I could talk about there. I definitely want that one. Now I'll only write up one example of this for you, but if I was going to go ahead and do that, I would probably write about this one, because again it's kind of suggesting how early on in the letter there he addresses him as precious, this idea of valuable, and I can make a different point from the other stuff there. And then I would probably, because it's talked about so much, I'm going to go for this idea that he doesn't want his brother to be upset, because this is kind of repeated throughout, so I'm definitely going to go for that. So the way I'd structure it, I've got my arrows. I'm going to write about this one first, because there is so much I can write about in that. Start with your strongest one first, because if you run out of time, at least you've got the quote in there that you can talk the most about, and that's where you're going to gain the most marks. I'm probably going to talk about, actually it would make sense to write about this one, because again this is repeated, it's talked about so often that again I could talk about that quite a lot. So I'm going to go for that one, and then I probably end on that. So I've got 3 quotes, so I'm going to select 3, because I know that I'm going to be talking so much about this first one that I might well need more than that sort of 10 to 15 minutes if I was going to talk about 4 quotes. So I will, as I said, show you an example of 1 paragraph, but in the exam I would want to write up 3 to 4 paragraphs depending on how much time I've got left. If I had enough time, I'd pick something else then that I would also want to add on at the end. But 3 paragraphs, writing in detail about the language features and how it shows that love for his brother would be more than sufficient. Alright, so again I've just got the Word document up, but I have got in front of me the question, and I've got the extract in front of me as well, because obviously I want to keep looking back and forth at those so that I am writing this up correctly, answering the question correctly, and obviously quoting correctly. Now, as I said, I am only going to give an example of one of the paragraphs. I'm going to go with the first paragraph, which was that quite long quotation, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to answer that using that very long quotation, because ordinarily I would say you need to make sure that you are using quotes that are not extremely long, that you're only taking out the bits that you want. But in that quote there's so much that I do want to talk about, and I am going to cut it down slightly, but again this is probably a little bit longer a quote than I would usually use. So as ever, I know that for some of you answering this question it can be quite difficult because you're not quite sure how to begin. You can start really simply just by rewording the question. Okay, so Dostoevsky uses language to express how much he loves his brother when he writes. Using part of the question, get rid of that typo. Okay, so this is where I'm going to switch over to having a little look at the extract, because I want to make sure that I am quoting this correctly. So I remembered you, brother. And I'm going to just put ellipses there to cut out that little bit, where it says, and all yours during the last minute, because it still makes sense as well. You alone were in my mind. Oh. Again, I'm going to put my ellipses there to show that I've sort of squashed that down a little bit. So as I said, I've not used that complete quote. I might well go on to talk about the only then I realised how I love you, dear brother mine, but again, I use my judgment depending on the timing here and how long it would take me to do this. So I've got my point, I've got my quote. So Dostoevsky uses language to express how much he loves his brother when he writes, I remembered you, brother, during the last minute, you alone were in my mind. So I want to break this down now, and I want to zoom in onto specific techniques and what they suggest. So like I said, I want to show off to the examiner that I can write in a more academic way here by mentioning the subject terminology as I can see it. So I will start with that verb remembered, okay? The use of the verb, and again, because I'm quoting from the text, I'm going to put remembered in quotation marks. Suggests that as the writer is close to death, he is drawing on memories and recalling those important to him. Go back and correct that typing error. The personal pronoun is directly addressing the reader of the letter, whom we know to be his, and again I'm going to quote this, brother, therefore reinforcing the strength of the relationship between the two men, and emphasizing the relationship they have as brothers. I'm going to just add in there as well, and I would do this in the exam, I'd go back the familial relationship they have as brothers, so just in other words the family bond that they have as brothers, and then I'm going to pick out this idea of during the last minute, you alone. I'm going to say that the repetition of the pronoun you adds a tone of desperation to, again just going back and where I can see I've made these errors, I'll go back as long as it's not interfering with the flow of my thoughts, then I'll go back and change it as I can. If it's going to interrupt the flow of your thoughts, it's better to get your thoughts down and then go back and correct it. The repetition of the pronoun you adds a tone of desperation to the letter, and emphasizes the need the writer feels to connect to his brother. So again, I'm going back, checking the quote to see what else I can pull out of it. The adjective alone to describe his brother, because there's you alone. Adjective alone. Adjective alone suggests or highlights, reinforces maybe. What have I used so far? So again, I will check what I'm writing. Suggests, I've said suggests, I've said reinforcing. I'll say highlights. So highlights the significance of the relationship he has with his brother, as it is only his brother that who he is thinking about in the final moments of his death. Conveying to the reader the strength, the depth, because I know I've used strength, the depth of Dostoevsky's love for his brother. Okay, and so what I would do is then obviously check that. So after use language to express how much he loves his brother when he writes, remember to you, brother, during the last minute you alone remembered. The use of the verb remember suggests that as the writer is close to death, he is drawing on memories and recalling those important to him. Personal pronouns directly addressing the reader of the letter, who we know to be his brother, therefore reinforcing the strength of the relationship between the two men and emphasizing the familial relationship they have as brothers. The repetition of the pronoun you adds a tone of desperation to the letter and emphasizes the need the writer feels to connect to his brother. The adjective alone reinforces the significance of the relationship he has with his brother, as it is only his brother who he is thinking about in the final moments of his death, conveying to the reader the depth of Dostoevsky's love for his brother. Okay, so I'll do what I did before, so you can see that I'm addressing the question. So there again, it's sort of rewording the question, so I'm using that. I've got my quotation, and I'm doing that throughout as well, where I'm putting in quotation marks those words that I'm zooming in on. And this is the importance of checking, because what I've just realised as well is that I need to add something in here as well. So where I've added this here, I'm going to put you, so the personal pronoun you. I want to be very specific. I want to make sure that there's nothing there that the examiner is going to misinterpret. I will put, where have I got it? I'll put in red the subject terminology. So I have identified the verb. I have talked about personal pronoun. I have talked about repetition of the pronoun. I have talked about the adjective. Right, and then where have I explained all of this? So I've said there, suggests. I've said that it is directly addressing. That's not really explaining, but it's reinforcing the strength of the relationship between the two men, the familial bond that they have. That's a tone of desperation, so again, kind of suggesting what the use of that repetition of the pronoun is doing. And I've explained here that it's highlighting that he's thinking about his brother's death, and then I'm making that final link back again to the question. So I hope that helps with the language question. I know that actually quite a few of you found that one pretty straightforward, because looking at language is one of the things that we've looked at extensively with literature, and something that we were looking at when we were studying all of the texts last year before we went into lockdown. So hopefully that helps with answering question 3. So I'll have a quick look at the mark scheme and how you could have answered that question. Obviously, like I said, in the exam I would write another 2 or 3 paragraphs depending on how much time I've got there, but you can see I've tried to sort of pick out and zoom in on every little bit of the quote that I used. Okay, so as with the other one, this is the mark scheme, so you get 12 marks for this one. Again, it goes up to level 4, very similar to the last question, where again for level 4 you have to be perceptive and detailed in your response. So shows a detailed and perceptive understanding of language, analyses the effect of the writer's choice of language, selects a range of judicious quotes, uses a range of subject terminology appropriately. So this is why I would emphasise using that subject terminology if you do know it, because although the exam board says you don't need subject terminology, actually it's in the mark scheme, so you may as well use it. Things you could have potentially discussed and focused on: the adjectives and nouns to show care for his brother, so precious friend, dear brother. Imperatives to show care as well there, so do not grieve for me. All these things we picked out. Use of repetition and exclamations to emphasise the feeling of love and care. And the positive lexis, so that those semantic field to show how the news of his brother will give him hope and life. So hopefully that helps with answering question number 3. So we'll go on to question number 4 next. So question 4 then asks you to refer to source A and source B. So both again, which you will have already read all of for question 2. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a cheat for answering this question. So it's asking you to compare, so it's a comparison question. Again, it's a how question as well. How the two writers convey their different attitudes to death. So my keywords there: different attitudes to life and death. Okay, now it will always give you some bullet points to support some things that you need to look for. Obviously, it's drawing attention again to that idea of attitudes, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's asking you to compare methods, and it is asking you to support your ideas with references to both texts. It's a 16-mark question, so again, I know then how much time I should spend and how many paragraphs I need to be writing by that, which I will annotate in a second. So it's a how question, so I know I need to look at techniques. I know that it is different attitudes. Now, different attitudes means that I need to pick out their opinion and their feelings and their thoughts basically on things. Obviously there's my focus of the question. Again, it's drawing attention to attitudes, so it's the same thing as there. Methods, I've already said about that idea of techniques. And then references just means quotes. As I said, it's a 16-mark question. I should roughly be spending about 20 minutes on this question, and I'm going to want to write about 2 comparative paragraphs or 4 paragraphs altogether. Okay, so I know what I need from the question now. I'm going to go and look at the sources, and I'm going to give you a little hint for that as well when we come to look at the sources. Alright, looking at source A then, what I am going to do, I'm actually only going to look at the beginning of the article and the end of the article, try and see if I can pick up the idea of the attitude that the writer might have towards the topic of life and death. So again, I've already read this a couple of times now, especially the beginning part, because I've answered questions about it for question 1 and for question 3 as well. So I'm already pretty familiar with the text, so I'm just going to look at potentially the first 3 paragraphs, see if there's anything there that I think is going to benefit me with answering that question. So years ago on a visit to Thailand, I was surprised to learn that Buddhist monks often contemplate the photos of corpses in various stages of decay. So I can make a note there of the fact that he's surprised to learn. So again, it kind of links in with what we were looking at before. It's this idea that he learns about this. The Buddha himself recommended corpse meditation. This body too, as students were taught to say about their own bodies, such is its nature, such is its future, such its unavoidable fate. Paradoxically, this meditation on death is intended as a key to better living. It makes disciples aware of the transitory nature of their own physical lives and stimulates a realignment between momentary desires and existential goals. In other words, it makes one ask, am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? So that's a key quote there. And I'd probably end up using that because that kind of rhetorical question, he's asking himself and making us want to question as well whether we are using our life in the sort of best way possible that we can. So I'd probably go for that. It kind of sums up how he's considering his life and how learning about this information of corpse meditation made him reconsider his position in life as well. In fact, most people suffer grave misalignment. In 2004 article in the journal Science, a team of scholars, including Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, surveyed a group of women to compare how much satisfaction they derive from their daily lives. Among voluntary activities, we might expect that choices would roughly align with satisfaction. Not so. There are women reported deriving more satisfaction from prayer, worship and meditation than from watching television, yet the average respondent spent more than 5 times as long watching TV as engaging in spiritual activities. So I'm going to just stick with that one because that one for me is the one that jumps out. That one tells me that his attitude, he was obviously interested, and he sparked his interest in obviously creating this article and doing further research into the idea of what we're doing with our lives and how we need to sort of change and adapt that. So what I'm going to do, as I mentioned before, I'm now going to skip to the end of this article because I want to kind of, like I said, save myself a little bit of time in the exam. So I'm going to look at the beginning of the article and the end of the article, and I'm going to obviously want to find at least 2 quotes from this extract and at least 2 quotes from the other extract to see how they're different. And I've already got an idea of how they're going to be different because I've already read the 2 extracts for paper 2. But by reading the top and the bottom of the article, it also means then that I can check to see if the attitude of the writer has actually changed as they've written the article as well, so I can compare directly that beginning and the end. So I'm just going to read the last 3 paragraphs again. I'm just sort of randomly thinking about how much I've got to read there, so just make a sort of sensible estimate of what to read for this question. So some might think that last year's test is impractical. As an acquaintance of mine joked, if I had 1 year to live, I'd run up my credit cards. In truth, he probably wouldn't. In a new paper in the science journal PLOS 1, 2 psychologists looked at the present value of money when people contemplated death. One might assume that when reminded of death, people would greatly value current spending over future spending, but that's not how it turned out. Considering death actually made respondents less likely to want to blow money now than other scenarios did. So his attitude there is that, it's unexpected. You'd think that people would consider spending a lot of money when they know that they're going to die, but actually it was the reverse. I'm not necessarily interested in anything there really that pops out at me as something that I could talk in depth about, but I kind of have an idea of what's coming up when he talked about death making you funnier. Will cultivating awareness of the scarcity of life, of your time, make you grim and serious? Not at all. In fact, there is some evidence that contemplating death makes you funnier. 2 scholars in 2013 published an academic paper detailing research in which they subliminally prime people to think about either death or pain. When asked them to caption cartoons, outside raters found the death prime participants' caption to be funnier. So I'll probably go for this bit here, because his attitude is almost that we would consider this practice to be quite serious and grave a topic, but actually contemplating on death doesn't make you that at all. So that might tie in quite nicely there to the idea of his attitude and his thoughts. There's still time to rethink your resolutions, forget losing weight and saving money. Those are New Year's resolutions for amateurs. This year, improve your alignment and maybe get funnier in the process. Be fully alive now by meditating on your demise. Happy 2016. So that for me is probably the best bit that I would take from this bottom section. So he's giving us this imperative, be fully alive, and this idea as well, the adverb there, fully, is suggesting sort of to make the best in life, to think about how you're spending your time by meditating on your demise, and sort of linking then to obviously his experience, but that seems to be his thoughts and feelings about life and death, summed up quite nicely there in that last quote. So for this one, for this extract, I think I would definitely go for the rhetorical question. It kind of sums up there that idea of contemplating and reflecting on life, and thinking about it. And I'd probably go for this one as well, so that idea that he's encouraging people to be reflective and think about life and their death. So that's what I would choose from that source. Now I am going to do the same thing for this one, but again I am just going to look at the beginning and the end, and pick out the ideas about life or death. So, brother, my precious friend, all is settled. I am sentenced to 4 years hard labour in the fortress, I believe, of Orenburg, and after that to serve as a private. Today, the 22nd of December, we were taken to the Semenov drill ground. There the sentence of death was read to all of us. We were told to kiss the cross, our swords were broken over our heads, and our last toilet was made. White shirts. Then 3 were tied to a pillar for execution. I was the 6th. 3 at a time were called out. Consequently, I was the second batch, and no more than a minute was left me to live. I remembered you, dear brother, and all yours. During the last minute, you alone were in my mind. Only then I realised how I love you, dear brother mine. Now, I am going to take probably from here where it says, during the last minute, you alone were in my mind. Only then I realised how I love you. So, whereas in the first article, there is a focus there on the idea of, thinking about how you're spending your time. Are you getting the most out of your life? We've already got a contrast here in attitude and thoughts, because this man sort of faced death and was about to be executed, and actually in those final moments he wasn't really thinking about whether he'd wasted his life or what he'd done in his life. Rather, he was thinking about the people that were important to him. So I've already got a quote there, and I know I talked about this for my question 2, but it does not matter that I want to repeat this, or maybe it was question 3. So it doesn't matter that I've used this quote before. It's absolutely fine to use it again if I'm trying to make a different point about it, and if I am using it then to answer a different question, that's absolutely fine. In fact, it's about working smarter, not harder. If you can repeat certain quotes and they fit in with the question, then you've already done some of the hard work. You can just kind of cross it over to the question that you're now on. So actually, I've got a quote from there. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I've got a quote that I feel confident about. I've got an idea of what else was said, but actually, I think that's going to be one of the stronger bits of evidence to select. So I'm going to go with that one. Then I'm going to skip to the end, and I'm going to see if I can pick out now something here that I think is important. And actually I have got an idea of what I want to take out from this bit. So again, I'm going to almost like skim through and scan through. I'm not necessarily going to read everything because I've already got an idea. I've already read this through now, particularly for this source. I've read this twice because we had the comparative summary question, and now we've got, and we had the language question, which was talking about this extract. So now I am just going to pick out a section that I remember. And it's going to be in this last one actually. Do not grieve for the love of God, do not grieve for me. Do believe that I am no downhearted. Do remember that hope has not deserted me. So actually, that is quite important. So I could potentially go for that one. because it's showing that even though he's faced death, his attitude now is almost like renewed for life, that he feels hopeful because he has been spared from execution. So, in 4 years there will be a mitigation of my fate. I shall be a private soldier, no longer a prisoner. And remember that sometime I shall embrace you. I was today in the grip of death for 3/4 of an hour. I have lived through with that idea. I was at the last instant, and now I live again. So I could go for I was in the grip of death. I was at the last instant, and now I live again. So I could go for that actually. I could use that one as well, because it again shows that idea that the live again. There's almost exuberance in that, and we can see it from the use of that the exclamatory sentence, and that idea of the focus on live as well, that verb, suggesting that it's about life and about carrying on, and he almost feels renewed. So I could go for that one as well. So I've got some quotes now from both of them, and I will definitely go ahead and use that first one that I'd selected. So I'm definitely going to go for this one in this extract, and at the bottom I would probably go for I could combine them actually. I'd probably take the quote from here, I am no downhearted, do remember that hope has not deserted me, and then I'd probably put my ellipses ... and I'd put now I live again. So I could use that then for my second sort of comparative paragraph that I'm gonna write. Now, as I said to you before, I'm not going to write up the whole response, but I will give you an example of comparing the first extract where it said, am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? And I will compare that to the opening of this letter where he says that, during the last minute, you alone were in my mind, only then I realised how I love you. So I'll type that up as I have done with the other answers, so that I can show you how to structure that response, and hopefully that will help. Okay, so answering question 4 then. So I know that as with the others, sometimes it can be a bit difficult starting the question, but again I'm going to make this really sort of simplistic. I am going to again use almost like a formula for answering this question. Obviously, if you deviate away from that and it's still, your answer still makes sense and it still hits the criteria, you will be marked for that. You're not going to lose marks if you deviate away from the structure that I'm giving here. But obviously the structure I'm giving is more if you're not quite sure how to begin or where to begin. So I'm simply going to restate part of the question. As I said before, logically it makes sense for me to start with source A, so that's where I will start. And if you remember, it was that rhetorical question that I'm going to discuss. So am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? And the question was, compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes to life and death. So with source A, I'm going to use part of the question, and then I'm going to use an adjective to describe how he sort of seems to come across with answering that question. So I'm going to put both writers seem to view life and death very differently. So I'm going to zoom in now to source A, that's where I'm going to start, and I'm going to, like I said, sum up using an adjective how I would describe his attitude. So in source A, the writer's attitude, I'm going to use the wording of the question, the writer's attitude to life and death seems to be very reflective. So he's sort of reflecting on it, he's kind of questioning it. So I'm going to support that then with my quote. This is clear in the use of the, and I'm going to use my terminology, because I know what a rhetorical question is. I know that the quote is a rhetorical question, so I may as well show off to the examiner that I know that terminology. So this is clear. In the use of the rhetorical question, am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? Okay, my apologies, year 11. What's happened? For some reason my video decided to stop recording then when I was halfway through that. So I didn't realise that it had stopped, and I continued writing up my answer. So this was my final response. I did go ahead and I'd colour coded it and everything for you. So rather than lose the will to live and do that all again, I will just read through it with you and explain sort of what I've got there. But hopefully the colour coding as well will help you sort of see how I've structured my response and will help you in thinking about your responses. This is something you can do, so when you're practicing you can colour code and make sure that you've got all these elements included in your response. So as I was explaining in the video, I've started off there by tying back to the question. So both writers seem to view life and death very differently. Then I've gone on to source A. So in source A, the writer's attitude to life and death seems to be very reflective. This is clear in the use of the rhetorical question. Am I making the right use of my scarce and precious life? The writer is posing this interrogative. I want to try and use different vocabulary there. And again, just show off to the examiner that I know the terminology and that I can write academically. To reflect on how he spends his life and emphasises that life is scarce and precious. These adjectives suggest that life is something remarkable and valuable that needs to be well spent and well used. The writer's attitude is therefore quite philosophical as he muses on the importance and significance of using life well. However, so I'm now going to source B, and I want to make that comparison because I need to talk about the differences. That was what I highlighted in the question. So the writer's attitude is very different. He is thankful for life and the people he is close to. When he states, during the last minute, you alone were in my mind, only then I realised how I love you, dear brother. The writer's use of the personal pronoun, and I can see there actually I need to put a apostrophe in. The writer's use of the personal pronoun you suggests the significance and urgency with which he addresses his brother, and the emotive declarative. So again, I want to try and show off my grasp of subject terminology. Phrase I love you suggests that his feelings towards life and death are significantly different to that of the writer in source A, because, and now I'm explaining, when he faces death he does not reflect on how he has spent life, but thinks only of his brother. His attitude focuses more on the importance of his bond with someone he is close to, as he declares it was you alone to his brother, the adjective alone suggesting that nothing else was of importance. So I've really explained that and picked that apart for the examiner. Unlike the writer in source A, where he seems to question how all of one's life is spent. So making that comparison and tying it back to the question then. So hopefully that has helped. But if you do have any questions, you can either leave me a little question on here, or you can drop me a question in our Google Classroom or any of your teachers if you're not one of the students that I teach, or feel free to drop me an email as well, and I'll be more than happy to help. But I really hope that that was useful, and we'll give you the chance then to go through that for revision, and you can pause and make notes as you go through it. But as I said, any questions, just message me. Okay, and with that final message there, just going back to the mark scheme, so looking at question 4, again you've got up to level 4, very similar to the other mark schemes that we've looked at. Again, it's about being perceptive and detailed in your response then for that level 4 descriptor. So shows a detailed understanding of the ideas and perspectives of the writers, compares the ideas and perspectives in a perceptive way, so maybe picking out things that are not as obvious, analyses how methods are used. So again, like I said, there isn't that emphasis that you have to use subject terminology, but it is in the mark scheme that you have to discuss methods, so it makes sense to put them in there and not need them than need them and not have them in there. And then selects a range of judicious quotations as well from both texts. So again, thinking about well-judged quotations, quotations that you can squeeze a lot of information out of. So obviously that's where we want to be trying to aim to get to with our marks. Again, you've got this list of potential choices that could have been focused on. So you could potentially have talked about how Brooks feels that people should think about their own mortality in order to make the most of life, whereas Dostoevsky is now deeply aware of the preciousness of life, having faced his own death. Brooks' ideas comes from his research, while Dostoevsky had a real-life experience. Brooks' ideas are based on the fact that people living in the 21st century Britain tend to spend more time watching TV than doing anything worthwhile. Dostoevsky's ideas are based on the fear that he had when he thought he would never see his brother again. So methods that could have been chosen there as well have been listed. So, as said, hopefully that helps.